Okay, we're going to start our new unit on rational expressions. We're going to figure out what a rational expression is and how to simplify them today. So you can see lots of factors. You got one here being canceled out, so we'll come back to that a little bit later on. So to start with, a rational expression is basically a fraction. So you've been dealing with fractions for quite a while now, but when we have fractions that involve polynomials, we get something like just 2x over 3. Or you can see here is a more complicated one. We got a quadratic on the top and then minus 1 on the bottom and so on. So any of these that are fractions, these are all rational expressions. Even this last one that's not a fraction, remember we could always put it over 1. So all of those are indeed fractions. So that's the types of things we're going to be working with, and we need to be able to simplify. So because they're fractions, we're going to use a lot of fraction rules, but another key thing that we'll be doing with these is factoring. So when we're dealing with rationals, because we're dividing, we can't divide by 0. If you try typing in 3 divided by 0 in your calculator, you get an error. So we can't divide by 0. So what that means is, if we have a variable on the bottom, like in this case we have x on the bottom, or we have n minus 1, if we have things like that on the bottom, there's going to be a non-permissible value. So quite often we're going to have to state those, and sometimes you might have to factor first to help you figure out what those non-permissible values are. So let's look at a few examples. So this first one, we have 1 over x. So we don't want 0 to be on the bottom, so that means x can't equal 0. So as long as x is any other number, we're okay. If we look at the second one, we have x plus 1. So that means x plus 1 can't equal 0. So we could actually just bring the 1 over, so that means x can't equal negative 1. And now the one below it, we got two separate factors. So the x by itself will be just like the first one. It can't be 0. And then the x minus 2 would be, 2 can't be 0, so 2 minus 2 would give you 0. So you get a couple different options. This next one, we've got two different letters, x and y, and we just write it as both of them can't be 0. Okay, so those are pretty straightforward, so we're just basically looking at the bottom and trying to figure them out. If you think back to the last unit, if we had an equation of something like that, those were our x-intercepts. When we actually solved these things, we got 2 and 0 as being our answers. So our non-permissibles are really the same thing. So we were finding solutions that make the equation equal to 0. Now what we're doing is looking for solutions to the bottoms that make the thing not equal to 0. But a lot of the math is exactly the same. So now when we go to simplify a question, what we're going to be trying to do is trying to cancel things out. So what we want to do with any kind of fraction question is factor the top and bottom separately. Get everything factored as completely as you can. Then you can cancel factors out of the top and bottom that are the same, which will simplify the fraction. And then the last step is state your non-permissibles. So if we look at a few examples here. So the first one is just a regular fraction, 8/10. So what you want to do is think of that fraction. We can divide them both by 2. So we could think of it as being 2 times 4 on the top and 2 times 5 on the bottom. So because we have two factors that are the same, the 2 on the top and the bottom, we can actually cancel those out. So our final answer would be 4/5. And we have no variable on the bottom, so that means there is no non-permissible for that one. Okay, our second question, x on the top, it's good the way it is. The bottom we have x squared plus x, so we want to common factor out an x, and that would leave us with x plus 1. So divide x out of both of those, we get x plus 1 left over. Now that we have it in that form, we can cancel out the x on top and bottom. Those are the same factors, so our final answer would be 1 over x plus 1. And because there's x on the bottom, we have to do our non-permissible. So we have our negative 1 would be the non-permissible for our answer. But we have to actually make this work for the originals. If we look at our factored form, that's the easiest place to figure out your non-permissibles. So x can't equal negative 1, and it can't equal 0. So if I go back to the previous page, you can see where I have state non-permissible values. You want to do that from the factored form. You want to be able to figure those out where you factor. So before you cancel is actually a good time to do your non-permissibles. So let's try that with this next one. So our top, we have x minus 2, it's good. Our bottom is a quadratic, so we'll factor that into x and x. 4 goes into 2 and 2. We have a plus 2 and a minus 2 to give us 0 for our middle term. And now we're ready to cancel. So the x minus 2 actually cancels, so our final answer is 1 over x plus 2. And our non-permissibles from our factored form will be negative 2 and positive 2, right? We want to go to these steps here to figure out those answers. Okay, and the last one I have on the page here is another quadratic one. So the top will factor out a common factor of 3. So divide both of them by 3, you'll get x minus 2. And on the bottom, it's one of the tougher ones. So our factors will be 2x and 1x. And what multiplies to give us 10? We got 5 and 2. And it's a good way, if you look at the top, we have an x minus 2. So there's a good chance the other one will be minus 2 to cancel. So if we kind of use a little bit of trickery, we can see if that one's minus 2, that means the other one would have to be plus 5. And if we actually FOIL that out, if we go 2x plus 5 times x minus 2, we FOIL those out, we'd get 2x squared minus 4x plus 5x minus 10. And if we simplify that, we would get just plus 1x in the middle, which matches our answer. So we know we've got the right factors. So now we're good to go. We just cancel away. And like I said, you know it's going to likely cancel, so you can kind of guess at which factor is which. So our final answer will be just 3 over 2x plus 5. So now our non-permissibles. Okay, so our non-permissibles in this case, then again, you want to go back to your factored steps. We've got plus 2 for that one. That one's easy. And the 2x plus 5, that one's a little bit harder. Remember when we did these before in the last unit, you want to think of bringing the 5 over and then dividing by 2. So we should get negative 5 halves for the other one. Or the shortcut, remember, is do the opposite. So negative 5 divided by the front number. And that's all for simplifying questions. We're going to continue simplifying in the next unit. So you'll get a bit more experience with this and practice with harder ones. But the idea is just factor top and bottom, cancel what you can, state your non-permissibles, and that's all.